Hello again and welcome back to our course on Project 2016. In this section and the next section or two we're going to look at views in Project 2016. You've already seen a few views such as Gantt chart view already. We're going to look at quite a few others in the next couple of sections, but I'm also going to introduce you to some general aspects of views that will help you as your knowledge and use of Project 2016 develops. Now, in a little bit of a break from tradition, we're going to look at the exercise, the bathroom refit exercise, version 4B, my answer to exercise 4, during this section. And one of the reasons for doing that is I want to explain a couple of things about my solution to exercise 4. Hopefully your solution to exercise 4 will have been pretty similar to mine. But I'm going to show you one or two tools that probably would have helped you to do the exercise a little more easily. But first of all, a little reminder about some basic features of views. We're currently showing Gantt chart view. If you look on the View tab, the leftmost button, Gantt chart, is highlighted. That's the one that's currently in use. Don't forget, you've got those specific buttons down the bottom right hand end of the status bar that let you switch between some of the more commonly used views. And you've also got the zoom control down there as well. Now, up on the ribbon on the View tab, the first two groups, one of them says Task Views and one of them says Resource Views. And typically you'll use the views in those two groups for those specific purposes. So clearly the views that you're most likely to use with tasks are in the Task Views group. Those for resources are in the Resource Views group. However, if you click on Other Views, you'll see a complete list of views from the More Views list here. You'll also find that as you use Project 2016, it will update some of the views that are on drop-down menus based on your use of them. Now at the moment I'm looking at More Views in the Resource Views group. You can see that one of the views there is Gantt chart. So as you can see, I can access these views from various places. Now the other thing to remember is that many views involve a split of the screen. In fact, some of them involve not only a vertical split like this one, but you can have horizontal splits again, which we're going to look at in the next section. It's pretty straightforward to move that split line across, to change the balance of how much information you can see in the table on the left here or in the chart on the right. You can also change the width of any columns that aren't at a convenient width. So for example, if you decided the predecessor's column here was too wide, if you put the cursor to the right of the dividing line in its header, click with the mouse when you get that double arrow with the vertical bar, pull it to the left, you've made the column narrower. And if I wanted, for example, to make the start date a little bit wider, I could again get that double-headed arrow, click, drag out to the right, and I've made the start date wider. So that's how you can adjust what's on the left-hand half of the view. But now let's take a look at a completely different view related to task. Let's go into Task Usage View. In Task Usage View, what you have is a list of the tasks, and for all tasks where resources are assigned, it shows how much resource is used. Now, if you remember, with the bathroom refit project, the first couple of phases we don't have resources in use. But as we get further down into the implementation phase, as we see each task, so here 42, set up, skip, underneath that there is a contractor resource. Now I'm going to make the task name column wider. By the way, if you're doing this with touch, it's pretty much the same approach. You just basically tap on the right hand border in the header and drag it across when you get the double-headed arrow. But what you can see here is the amount of resource that's used on a particular task. So let's take, for example, the task set up skip for waste. Now the resource that's used is contractor. The amount of work is 8 hours, and we can see in the view on the right where that 8 hours occurs. It's on the Tuesday of the week beginning February 14th, 2016. So here we can see where our resource is being used. But not only can we see where the resource is being used and how much of it is being used, but we can also see various subtotals. So for instance, we have a preparation task 41 and the totals for the preparation task are shown here in its row by each day. So there's 8 hours Tuesday, 8 hours Wednesday, 8 Thursday, and 24 on Friday. Now the 24 hours on Friday are made up of 8 there, 8 there, and 8 there. So that's our 24 hours. So you can see how the work that's being done is broken down by task and by resource. Now sometimes when you're looking at a task usage view, the amount of information can actually seem quite overwhelming. The bathroom refit is not a huge project, but already as we scroll through time and through the tasks, you can see just how much is going on and how much work is being done. This is a situation where using the outlining that I showed you earlier on in the course can be very useful. So let's go up to the data group on the View tab, click on Outline, and say we only want to see level 2. Now with level 2, let me just scroll back, go to the beginning again. Now with level 2 we only see the level 2 tasks. However, if I scroll across to where the work is happening, you will see the totals for each of those tasks. And of course, if I went to level 1, let me go up here and see where the work is being done, you see the implementation phase work and how much is being done in the overall phase on each day. And you can also see when the completion phase starts how much work is being done on each day there as well. Note right at the top a total for the whole project. So you can see there how we can control the level of detail that we can see in task usage view. And if we turn our attention now to what we call the time phased data on the right, we can do quite a lot there to customize the view to our specific requirements at any time. If you look in the Zoom group on the View tab, the leftmost control there says timescale. Currently days are selected. There are quite a few other options. Let's take a look at weeks, for example. And there we can see on a week by week basis how much work is being done. So we can see our totals for each week. Now when you make a selection like that, what you finish up with quite often is pretty much a whole project squashed into a very thin amount of space. And you may want to widen things out or see a little bit more. And there are quite a few other options with Zoom that I want to take a look at next. One of the most useful ones of all is this one, Entire Project. Note the screen tip description, update the view so the entire project is visible on the screen. Now that will work in any view where you've got the time phase data. So it starts at the beginning of the project. Of course, in this particular project, the first 2 phases we don't have any resources assigned, so we've got no work being done, so it looks as though it's got entire project wrong. But in fact, there's plenty going on here. We're just not recording any work for resources in the sort of first 2/3 of the view on the right here. The actual recorded work is towards the latter end of the life of the project. Now you also have zoom control here, so you can do simple things like zoom in, or you can zoom out as required. Often when you do that you might well lose sight of exactly where you are in terms of the project. You might have to use the scroll bars on the right or at the bottom in order to bring everything back into view. The other thing to notice here, and this can be a little bit unnerving at first, is that sometimes when you do a particular view, like entire project, what Project 2016 does is to adjust the timescale to what is sometimes a strange setting. So for instance, in doing what I've done there, the timescale now is 3 days. So look at those markings there. You've got January 16th, 19th, 22nd, 25th, 28th, 31st, and then you get February 3rd, 6th, 9th, and so on. So it's doing it in chunks of 3 days, which is a rather strange unit of time. Although, of course, it copes with it perfectly well. These totals of work will still be completely accurate. Now, sometimes that sort of thing can be a little bit annoying. There is ultimately, though, a way that you can adjust timescale where you can pretty much achieve whatever effect you want to achieve. So let me show you how to do the ultimate adjustment to the view of time on the right there. If I right click over the header, which currently includes the timescale markings for months, days and so on, one of the options is timescale, and that brings up the timescale dialog. First of all, you can have up to 3 tiers of time, and I'm going to introduce a third tier here just to show you how it's done. So timescale options part way down show I've currently got 2 tiers, middle and bottom. I'm going to change it to 3 tiers, top, middle and bottom. And then I will set each of those 3 tiers by selecting the appropriate tab in the dialog and then saying what I want to show in that tab. At the moment, don't worry about non-working time. We'll just concentrate on the first 3 tabs. In the top tier, for my units, just to demonstrate this basically, I'm going to put quarters. So I can then choose how I would like those quarters labelled. Default there, Q1 2009. Let's suppose instead of that I want Q109, Q209 and so on. How many of them do I want at a time? Well, I'm just going to do them one at a time. Remember what I said just now about 3 days? Well, if you wanted it marked in 3 days or 3 quarters, you'd say 3 of them here. You can also say how you want the markings in the header there aligned. I'm going to stick with left aligned. And very importantly, you can also scale the view. I'll show you that in just a moment. Let's go to the middle tier. For the middle tier, let's do single months. Let's mark them with that label option. 1 month at a time, again labelled left. And then for the bottom tier, I'm going to do them, let's do them in weeks. And let's do the weeks, let's put the dates in like that. And we're going to count 1 week at a time. We're going to align the dates in the center. Now there's a preview down at the bottom here which gives you an idea of what that whole setup's going to look like. So let's give that a go. So you can see I made quite a substantial change there. It's probably a little bit overdoing it really, but hopefully you get the idea from that. So I've got the timescale marked at the top in quarters, the second level in months, third level in days, and not only can I adjust that in a very, very flexible way, but I can also scale it. Let's go in and scale this now. Let's suppose that I think, well, actually that's too wide. I need to cover a longer period of time. Let's right click there again, bring up that timescale dialog again, and I'm going to scale the top tier. It's 100%. Let's do down to, say, let's go for 75%. I'm really showing you how to do this to show you how to do it, not because it's going to achieve a better result. So there we are. Now, as you can see, I can pretty much adjust that in any way I like, not only in terms of width, scaling and so on, but exactly how each time unit is labelled. Now you can use that approach to presenting time phase data on the right there, labelling, scaling, etc. up to 3 timescales on any view that has time phase data on the right. So this is task usage view. Clearly you could use it in Gantt chart view as well. In the next section we're going to take a look at resource usage. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the answer to exercise 4, and then I'm going to show you how to split the view horizontally and how that helps you in your use of Project 2016 as well. But that's it for this section. I'll see you in the next one.
To get the Project 2016 course exercise and instructor demo file, click the link below in the video details. You can also scroll through the video details to find each section for this course, in addition to the playlist for the complete course for Microsoft Project 2016. Finally, if you're enjoying this training, please leave us a thumbs up and some comments. Now, let's continue with our Microsoft Project training.
Hello again and welcome back to our course on Project 2016. In this section we're going to continue looking at views, and we're going to start by looking at resource views. Now I'm still looking at exercise 4b. I'm going to go to the View tab, and on there in the Resource Views group, let's first of all look at the resource sheet, which is straightforward enough. It's often the view we use to set up resources, and of course it's got a lot of the information about each resource on it, and will also often contain helpful indicators such as overallocation indicators. But let's look at the view that's in the group there above it, resource usage. And resource usage view is the sort of complement of task usage view. And what resource usage view gives us is a list of resources, and then for each resource a list of the tasks that that resource is working on. Now, as usual, there's a certain amount of jiggery-pokery needed here in order to make the columns and the split of the view a little bit more helpful. So I'm going to quickly do that. And you see the first resource that's listed is unassigned. So the unassigned tasks are the ones that don't have any resource assigned to them. There's really quite a long list of those. On this particular project, as you know, the first two phases I haven't yet allocated any resource to at all. But if I go down now to the main body of what's in phases 3 and 4, I have 3 resources: electrician, plumber and contractor. And for each one I can see a list of the tasks that that resource is working on. Now, this can be a very useful facility for getting a list of the tasks that each resource is working on. And of course you've got the work hours shown on the right there. In fact, the top section, the unassigned section, is often very useful because it will basically tell you which tasks you haven't got any resources assigned to yet. And very often you'll want to go through that and make sure that you haven't missed anything. The right-hand half of this particular view is a conventional timescale. So it shows the time phase data on the work for these work resources, and of course you can customize it in the way that I showed you in the preceding section. Now, you probably would have found this a very useful view to use to help you with exercise 4. But there's another resource view which can be very helpful when you're looking for overallocations and how to resolve them, and that's the resource graph. So I'm going to click on Other Views, and one of the items on the list there is resource graph. Now, this is really quite a different way of looking at the resources on a project. The left-hand half of the display shows a little panel for a resource, in this case contractor, and you step through your resources using the scroll at the bottom. So if I scroll to the left, I go from contractor to plumber to electrician, and then forward again. Now, if I use the scroll bar on the right, it takes me through the timescale of the project. Rather than laboriously go through that, let me click on Entire Project. And what you will see is the workload for the contractor resource in graphical form. Now, let me just quickly go back into the resource sheet. And of course, we solved our overallocation issue here by having 3 contractors. Let's go back to the situation where we only had 1 contractor, and let's go back now to the resource graph. Now, you can see how this resource graph view would immediately have shown you where your overallocation problem was, and to a large extent the extent of your overallocation. And you can see that contractor is overallocated, and you can see exactly when contractor is overallocated as well. So this is a very good view for identifying where overallocations occur. So I've introduced you there to a couple of other important views. There are many more in Project 2016. If I click on Other Views and then on More Views, I get this More Views dialog where you can access the many different available views. We're going to be looking at some more of those during the course, but I strongly suggest that you work your way through those, experiment with those. A couple of those you won't see because they're custom ones. They're ones that I've made for my own projects. And you can create your own views, you can copy a view as a starting point for a custom view, and you can edit the definition of a view. So as your use of Project 2016 develops, it's a good idea to find out about customizing views because it really can save you a lot of time and effort. But what I want to look at next is splitting the view. So I'm going to go back to Gantt chart view, and now I'm going to go to the split view group on the view tab, and I'm going to click on the details checkbox. And what that does is to split this view into 2 horizontally. The top part is still a Gantt chart, the bottom part is now a task form. Now, the important thing about this is that the task form will show the task information for the selected task in the Gantt chart at the top. So if I click on Decide About Project Manager, that's the information that I see in here. Let me go down to a further part of the project, say down to here, Prepare for Flooring. Now watch what happens when I click on Prepare for Flooring. I'll actually see resource names here, so the contractor is the resource, and I'll also see a predecessor here. Now what you see in this task form is something you can choose, so you can decide which particular information to show in the task form. I'll come to that in just a moment. But if I use these next and previous buttons, they can be used to take me through the tasks in the project. So I'm currently got Prepare for Flooring, which is task with ID 45. Let's look at next. And note that as I step through with next and previous, I get the task information for the selected task in the Gantt chart at the top, and that's what I'm controlling using these next and previous buttons. Now, as I mentioned just now, you can actually choose what you want to show in the bottom for the selected task. If you right click over the task form, it gives you options predecessors and successors, resources and successors. You can even show in there schedule, and that includes things like the amount of work, 16 hours, the scheduled start date, the scheduled finish date, and the leveling delay that's currently applied. You can show work, the units, the work, overtime work, baseline work, actual work, remaining work. We'll talk about those later in the course. And you can include things like costs and notes. So you've got a good selection of things that you can show in the task form. If I go back up to the split view group and the drop down next to the details checkbox, you can even choose what is shown in the lower part of the split view. So we've currently got a task form there. I could show a resource form. Now you might think that's a bit strange, isn't it, showing resource form there when you've got a task shown in the top. But in fact what it means is I'm looking at the Prepare for Painting task. The person working on that is the contractor, and what I'm seeing down the bottom here is the work that the contractor is currently scheduled to do. So I can actually look at what one of the resources working on the selected task is doing. If I chose as my selected task second fix electrics, I'd see tasks that the electrician is currently assigned to. Now when you've finished using a split view, there's a couple of ways of switching it off. One is to simply uncheck the details checkbox there in the split view group. The other way is to just hover over the split bar there till you get that double arrow for the cursor, and then just drag it off the bottom of the screen. So there are just a couple of other things I'd like to show you about views. You've already seen how to use the zoom to entire project, but sometimes when you're working on just part of a particular project, you may want to get some kind of automatic zoom so that you can see the most detail of that part of a project. So let's suppose that I was interested, say, in the preparation phase of the bathroom refit. If I select those tasks, just the tasks in the preparation phase, go to the zoom group, the zoom button, go to the zoom dialog and choose selected tasks, what Project 2016 does is to zoom just to those tasks. And in that way I can get the maximum amount of detail in view. Now exactly how this works does vary a little bit because it does have to deal in whole time units. So sometimes you'll get perhaps a tiny bit more or a tiny bit less than you need. But a little bit of scrolling, maybe slight adjustment on the timescale, you can normally come up with just the result that you want. And finally, one other view that I'd like to show you, we will be seeing some others later on in the course, but one particular one that also can be very, very useful. Let me go back to the top of this project, just make sure I haven't got particular tasks selected, and let's look at calendar view, because calendar view is a very interesting one where you can see the tasks of the project set out on a calendar. Note how the milestones are coloured differently, and you've got selector tabs at the top there where you can choose month view, week view, or in fact custom view showing a number of weeks or a date range. So that's calendar view, which can be a very useful way of looking at what's coming up on a project. That's basically it on views for this section. In the next section we're going to take a look at timelines. So please join me for that. Welcome back to our course on Project 2016. In this section we're going to take a look at timelines. And primarily timelines are used as a communication and presentation tool. A timeline can be a pretty good way of getting a summary of aspects, possibly even all aspects of a project, and presenting them to an audience, perhaps who aren't as interested in the detail of your projects as you are, or certainly an audience where the people don't have or use Microsoft Project. So you want to show them just the right amount of detail of a project, maybe highlight certain points, without going into the sort of complex diagram that we have here for the wedding. So first of all, let's switch on the timeline for the wedding and see what it looks like at the moment. On the View tab in the Split View group, there is a checkbox Timeline. And if I click on that, you'll see the current timeline for this project. Now, along the top of the timeline you have dates. The left hand end by default is the start date of the project, and the right hand end by default is the end date for the project. Now, at the moment there are no tasks shown on the timeline, and the only other thing shown is a marker indicating today. If I wanted to show some tasks on the timeline, let's suppose I wanted to show the selecting and ordering of the bridesmaid dresses. If I select that task in the Gantt chart and right click, one of the options is Add to Timeline. And that task now appears in the timeline. And you can see its duration in particular relative to the duration of the overall project. Now, so far I've pretty much ignored people using touch, so let me just do a little touch demo here. Let me just switch into touch mode for just a moment. And let me go to Make Guest List, and then I'm going to press and hold that task. And then on the drop down, the contextual menu from the mini toolbar, one of the options is Add to Timeline. So that's how you do the equivalent thing in touch. And as usual, there's a pretty close parallel to doing things with touch to doing things with keyboard and mouse. So I'm just going to switch back to mouse mode. So in that way you can add whichever tasks you want to the timeline in order to highlight those, to perhaps group some tasks together for the purposes of a presentation, or indeed just to give yourself a good summary of how a selection of tasks relate to each other and often how they are progressing. Having added a couple of tasks to the timeline, it's very easy to take them off again. So if I right click on Make Guest List, one of the options there is Remove from Timeline. It's important to recognize that you don't use the timeline in some automated way. You select what to add, and you'll usually select it on the basis of the purpose of the timeline, which, as I mentioned earlier, will quite often be some kind of presentation or summary of progress on all or part of a project. Now, one of the very important aspects of a timeline is that you may well want to format it. If I select the timeline, then I have Timeline Tools, a Format tab, and on that tab I have facilities, for instance, to change the colour of bars, to change the text styles and so on. Now, I'm not going to look at that in detail now, but let me just select that Select and Order Bridesmaids Dresses task, and let me go up to this command here, which is the background colour. Let me change the background colour to, say, that one, and as you can see, you can format the colour. In this case, I could perhaps use a larger font for the text, and so on. Now, I'll leave you to experiment with those formatting options for the timeline. I'm going to undo the last of those changes that I just made. Now, there's nothing to stop you working on the timeline in the orientation of the screen, etc., that I've got here. It's a very convenient way for adding and removing tasks. But you can actually work on the timeline on its own, and sometimes the rest of the display can be quite distracting. So let's adopt timeline view. You can do this in a couple of ways. If you right click on the grey bar at the left there, Gantt chart, one of the optional views that comes up is timeline view. But you can also just drag down that divider and you finish up in timeline view, where the timeline occupies the whole of the view. And one of the advantages of this is that you can build up a quite complex content for the timeline without the distraction of, as we had just now, a Gantt chart. You may immediately think, yeah, but that's not really very helpful, is it? Because I can't see the tasks to add anymore. But there are a couple of ways of doing that. With the timeline selected, on the Format tab in the Insert group, there is an Existing Tasks button. And if you click on that, it brings up a hierarchical list of existing tasks. And if you wanted to put 2 or 3 more tasks onto the timeline, select them like that, click on OK. Not only are they added to the timeline, but if necessary, the height of the timeline is adjusted to accommodate tasks that are actually happening at the same time. You can also add completely new tasks. You could add a task which isn't even in the schedule yet, and when you do that, it's added to the schedule and to the timeline at the same time. So if I wanted to add a task now, the details come up. I can fill in the task information dialog as normal, and when I click on OK, it would appear on the timeline and in my project schedule as well. Now, of course, for it to appear in the right place in the project schedule, I may have to set dependencies, I may have to set a start date and so on. But I can certainly enter the details of the task and have it added to both the schedule and the timeline in that way. I can add a milestone in that way, and I can also add something called a callout task. Now, this is basically going to do the same as adding the task does, but the task will in this case appear on the timeline as a callout. Now, what happens with a callout is that it appears outside the timeline as almost a sort of note. So let's take that task there, register wedding. If I right click it, one of the options is display as callout, and then it sort of appears as a callout outside the timeline, almost as an additional note, if you like. Now, earlier on I mentioned that one of the main reasons that people use timelines is for communication and presentation purposes. And if you have a timeline like this one, then in order to present it or include it, say, in a PowerPoint presentation or send it to somebody in an email, you have a number of options. On the Format tab, there is a copy group, and the copy timeline button there has 3 options: copy for email, copy for presentation, copy full size. You can use whichever of those is most appropriate. Copy basically to the clipboard and then paste in an appropriate format, either using the source theme, the theme here that we have, color scheme, etc., that we're currently using in project, or using a destination theme if you were perhaps pasting it into a Word document. And you can also paste it, if you like, as a picture, so you get exactly what you've got here, and then you can resize accordingly in the destination software where you're pasting this. And it's a very convenient way of looking at all or part of a project and presenting it to people, perhaps just extracting the key points that you want to make in a presentation. And the final thing that I want to show you here is that the main new feature in Project 2016 in relation to timelines was the ability to have more than one timeline. So let's suppose we want to just highlight a particular, perhaps shorter period in the project and add some tasks to that particular period. Let's suppose that we want to really show what's going to be happening during the period April to June. If you look on the Format bar in the Insert group, there is a timeline bar button. If I click on that, it adds a new timeline, a second timeline. And what I'm going to do with this one is change its dates. So I'm going to change its date range to go from the start of April, say, let's say to the end of June. And of course I could take some or all of these tasks or other tasks from the schedule and, for instance, just drag from that timeline into that timeline. And now, of course, I can choose which of those timelines I'm interested in at any particular time. This could typically be a phase within a project, and I may just want to show the tasks that are occurring within that phase or over that time period. So that gives us the ability to use multiple timelines. If I now revert back to the Gantt chart, and on the View tab switch on timeline again, I'll see both of the timelines, and I can add tasks to either, remove tasks from either, drag them between timelines, and so on. That's it on timelines. I'll see you in the next section.
If you're not a subscriber, click down below to subscribe so you get notified about similar videos we upload. To get the Project 2016 course exercise and instructor demo file, click over here, and click over there to watch the complete 7-hour beginner course for Microsoft Project 2016.